put this together. And thank you again.
You're very welcome.
All right, so let's move on to our next panel. It's a student panel, and it's called Translation and Society. I'm going to invite Ashley Jones-Lewis, who is a current student at the University of Massachusetts Boston Translation Program. Hello, Ashley.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Can.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so Ashley, do you want to introduce the panelists?
Sure.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
So to start, I'll tell you the panel description. This panel will show you the perspective of the students from the Spanish-English Translation Certification Program at University of Massachusetts, Boston, and SUNY Binghamton on some important topics in the translation and interpretation industry. Ketam Shraide, sorry if I'm not saying your name right, will present on social media and translation. Caitlin Deal will present on the importance of social science texts and their characteristics. And Slaviana Jakovac will tell us about the challenges that interpreters are facing nowadays. Is everybody ready? I wanted to ask if you guys want to ask questions. I think it'll be better if we do it at the end of all the presentations, just like in the previous presentation. So just put it in the Q&A. And yeah, if you guys are ready, I think Ketam can start with translation and social media from the State University of New York at Binghamton.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley, for the introduction, and thank you all for making this happen and for putting this together. Thank you very much for running this online. It's a great idea within this pandemic. Thank you very much. I'll share my screen, so if you, in order for you to see the presentation.
So if you would go to the green icon, says share screen, click on that.
Yeah, I do, I know, okay, because I run my courses online, actually. I teach online, so I know how to use the way. Okay, yeah. Actually, you say my name is right. So my name is Ketam Shraide. Thank you. I talk today about translation and social media. The media is one of the most important tools we have to get that message across. Even if we don't realize it, the media shapes our minds. We are influenced of what we see on screens and what we read on hashtags. So there is a message. Okay, can you hear me clearly or no? Shall I raise my voice or slow down, or is it clear?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, just a little louder.
Perhaps a little bit louder. Yes.
Louder. Okay.
Perhaps you want to use present your, put it in a present mode, as opposed to editing mode.
Which one?
Your presentation, your slides.
Yeah. What should I do?
Oh no, just if you want to hit present, so we can see the whole.
Oh yeah. Okay, sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Yeah. So we are influenced what we see on screens and what we read on hashtags. So for example, a lot of stereotypes have been perpetuated by media. For instance, the Hollywood movie called Real Bad Arabs, a documentary film directed by Saad Jali and produced by Media Education Foundation in 2006, delivers stereotypical images of Arab being terrorists and of women being undervalued. Most often, the images of Arab men and women within the media implement unrealistic ideas, or at least they exaggerate, leading audiences to perceive men as violent and women as having less value or power than men or inferior. In addition, social media consists of free platforms the authorities cannot control, and this is the great benefit of social media. For example, after the Arab Spring, young populations in the Middle East have been using social media platforms to project their voices. Recently, in some Arab countries like Egypt and Jordan, they have launched a law to prohibit sharing some political posts the government considers inappropriate. However, young generations are still using those social media platforms to alter the system and to subvert the societal norms. There are big movements on social media platforms today to spotlight the life experiences, hardships, societal norms, and expectations, and so forth. For example, there are many stand-up comedians in the Arab world who use stand-up comedy and social media to express their opinions and show their perspectives on current political and cultural issues. For instance, there is Joshua from Egypt and Nicholas Khoury from Jordan. These are two stand-up comedians very popular in the Middle East. They run stand-up shows. They post them on YouTube and share them on Facebook and Instagram. They are very popular in the Arab world, but not overseas because their shows are not translated. Here it comes the role of the translation in making those shows accessible to a broader audience. Currently, I'm working on a translation project to translate some of those shows into English and post them on YouTube and share them on Facebook and Instagram to expand their scope. Besides all that, there are other benefits or uses of social media, especially in the global market. How social media is essential to the translation business. Today, due to the ubiquity of mass media, relating translation to social media is prevalent. Social media has made the world a much smaller place. Now, more than ever, translation companies promote their services through social media to reach out to potential clients around the globe. Besides, different business companies use multilingual translation to promote their brands through social media. The biggest benefit offered by social media is the ability to connect directly with a global audience. Social media is a prominent medium in the field of translation. Thus, we should use it to the best we can to empower translators and perpetuate or subvert the translation norms. How to do that? Throughout history, the translator has been considered a servant to the writer. They were expected to be invisible, impartial, and faithful. Their role is to convey the meaning as if they were redressing the body, the meaning, with different clothes or languages. This metaphor, the clothes metaphor, used by Ben Van Wyck in his article, Imitating Bodies, and this is the citation, if you're interested for more information about that metaphor. Recently, the translator's visibility, agency, and even creativity have become acceptable and even celebrated. In this stance, translators choose the text they want to translate and determine the aim or the goal they want to achieve out of their translations. So when I decide to translate those shows, I make my choice to choose the text. So since 1970s, more attention has been paid to the translation theories centered around text type and text purpose, Scopus theory, and around translation strategies, primarily foreignization and domestication. Lawrence Venuti was the first one to formulate those two strategies, domestication and foreignization in modern sense. Venuti declared that he has inspired by the German philosopher Friedrich Schleiermacher. Domestication is the strategy of making the text closely conform to the culture of the language being translated to, which may involve the loss of certain elements from the text. While foreignization is the strategy of preserving the source text elements. So, to wrap up, the role of the translator in social media. Social media is power, and that power is a special key for translators to show their presence. It gives translators a powerful new way, making themselves visible and taking up space in mainstream media. It gives the translators and the readerships more ways than ever to communicate. By connecting translation with social media, translators are targeting the global audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ketan. That was such an interesting presentation.
Thank you.
All right, I have some comments, but I'm going to save them till the end just to make sure we get all the presentations done and get all the questions, and then we'll circle back to all the presentations. So if Caitlin Deal is ready, thank you. She's going to make a presentation about social science texts, key differences between Spanish and English, and she is a student from the University of Massachusetts, Boston.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right, let me try to share my screen. Okay, let me open this up. All right, great. Okay, so just a little bit of context. My undergrad was in political science, so this field particularly interests me, and I'm gonna go a little fast because I have a lot to say and I don't wanna stop everybody else from getting their information out. So this is on key characteristics of social science text through the lens of Spanish to English translation. So a lot of this stuff can apply to other languages, but I'm gonna look at specifics in Spanish and English. Oh, it's not letting me.
Caitlin, if you want, each presenter has about 7 minutes. So if you want, I can let you know when you have like a minute left, if you want to.
Okay.
Yeah, so you don't have to rush the whole thing.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. I might
Okay.
some things really quick. Okay, so my goals were to define what these texts were, to establish their importance in the field by showing some characteristics through Spanish and English translation, just to make it more, make people more aware of its importance. So what is social science? It is the study of human society and social relationships. So you can see all of these branches here are parts of social science, but I'm primarily focusing on politics, sociology, and that sort of thing. Why does this field matter? First of all, it serves the same purpose as language studies in my eyes. It serves to connect people and to connect cultures. And some points I noticed here: how can you understand another culture without understanding the language? So you can get an idea of the culture, but that's why I studied language, because you can really understand the culture once you understand how to use the words that they speak. And the same thing goes for how can you understand another language without its cultural context. The context that you have from the culture will help you understand why they use certain phrases, etc. in the language, so it makes your experience a lot better. And then my last point, social sciences affect public policy. So propaganda comes from social sciences. People will use theories to use propaganda or misinformation. Words have power, and that's why this field is important. Okay, so one obstacle is that English has become the accepted language of international discourse. So the resulting problems, we're seeing a one-directional flow of knowledge. In one of the research things I studied, it was saying that in the social sciences, more information is translated from English than into English. So other cultures are learning about our philosophies, but we're not learning as much about their philosophies. Number two is that academics from around the world have had to conform to writing in English in order to be competitive with their theories. But the problem is, as we all know, expressing your thoughts that were formed in your native language in another language is not as efficient most of the time. So as a result, they're seeing lack of success on the international realm because maybe they're not grammatically correct, or they're not phrased as well as they could be, and they're not able to compete with other English speakers. This is a particular problem for Spanish-speaking scholars. Number three is increasing homogenization of thought. So because more information is in English and successful in English, you're getting a lot of westernized thought. And then the last result is that political conversations are stunted within the original language because scholars, for example, in Colombia are writing in English so that people can understand them and that they can be successful. But citizens in Colombia aren't getting the information they want because it's in English by their own scholars. So the translators are the solution to build this bridge. But the problem is we need more translators in social sciences. So Emanuel Wallerstein says social scientists who are not very good translators are one type that we have, and then translators with a primary background in literature are the other type, but we don't have as much of the combination of the two. And a problem that can result from this is mistranslations of important texts, like Le Deuxième Sexe is a French feminist text from the 1960s, and it was translated incorrectly. One of the theories in the book was translated incorrectly into English. So as a result, a lot of academics started basing their theories on feminism on incorrect premises from this translation. So you can see why it's important to have more translators in the field. Okay, so what denotes a social science text? This is another reason I thought that these texts needed a little bit more of a division in the field, because are they literary, are they non-literary? One thing that makes them non-literary is field-specific jargon is really important. They propose concepts, especially academic social science texts. They're putting theories forward, but some differences are that the concepts are distorted by cultural and political and societal norms. So it's not like math, where you might have a different metric system or something like that, but it's the same. Math doesn't change. But here you have a lot of influences to consider. Are they literary? So in terms of literary, they both rely heavily on culture. They prioritize the artful use of words. So for example, with speeches, words matter. It's not just to get the concepts across, but you have propaganda, etc., and the artful use of words. And then differences are that theories and the dissemination of information take priority over entertainment. Okay, and then terminology is important. So what denotes a social science text? I concluded that it straddles the division between literary and non-literary texts. So that's another reason it needs to be important, because you can't abandon words for concepts. The flow of words and the literature and the devices matter. So here's just a few examples I have of different categories: surveys, editorials, non-governmental documents, governmental. And then a further distinction that's important is academic versus non-academic. So you can see academic writing requires people with social science backgrounds more so because of the cultural knowledge and the implicit details, whereas non-academic is a little bit more similar to legal document translation, and it can be translators with more knowledge in theory. And then some basic considerations are wordiness. We all know that. It depends what language you're speaking in. And then style guides you can use. You can see some of those there. And this one I thought was pretty interesting. So this is specific to social sciences. You have supranational contracts and treaties. So these are bilateral or multilateral agreements between countries that are either drafted between an intergovernmental agency like the UN, the EU, or during a conference like the Versailles Treaty or something like that. And they are characterized by strict syntactical rules. Sentences must correspond one-to-one because, for example, if you're referencing Article 2, Section 3, sentence number 4, you need to be able to reference it in German, in Spanish, whatever it is. And then these texts are considered hybrid documents because the result is unnatural in any one language. So it's not like you're taking one document in German that was already written specifically for a German audience. These documents are usually written at the same time from a culmination of languages coming together. So you get a funky result with a lot of new jargon that maybe didn't exist before, which shows features of all the cultures involved. So here's, oh,
Caitlin, sorry. You reached your time limit. So do you have any like conclusion statements?
Yeah, I figured that might happen. That's okay. Well, in conclusion, I just think that there are a lot more characteristics, as I've already shown, to study in social sciences. So that's why we need more studies on the field, because there's a lot of specific details to look into. So that's my conclusion. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Yeah, this topic is so interesting. I did collect a couple questions, but like I said, we'll come back to them after Sladyana presents, just to make sure we have time for everyone to present, and then we'll come back to the questions.
Sure, okay.
So Sladyana is presenting on interpreters in a globalized world, challenges, working conditions, and the future of the profession, also from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Are you ready, Sladyana?
Yes, I'm ready.
Perfect.
I just, let me just see how to, I don't know. Well, we'll just
I can see your screen.
Yeah, okay. So there are a lot of definitions of interpreting. One of my favorite is this one. Interpretation can be defined in a nutshell as conveying understanding. Its value stems from the fact that the speaker's meaning is best expressed in his or her native tongue, but is best understood in the languages of the listeners. I really like this definition because I think it actually covers the essence of interpretation. Why is interpretation important in globalized world? Well, now we have different conferences, different organizations that organize events that are usually covered by a lot of they have a lot of speakers and a lot of guests, so you need to cover a lot of languages as well. For example, United Nations or European Union, who, well, let's just say that European Union has 24 official languages, and they even need more from the countries that are in the accession process. So it's these are huge projects or conferences or events. Then we have medical and legal, which is, I think, the fastest growing field or fields in the interpretation these days. We have different trade agreements. So interpretation is becoming more and more important in a globalized world. Let's just go shortly over the types of interpretation. We have simultaneous, we have consecutive, and chuchotage. We all mentioned already these first two kind earlier, but now I will just mention that chuchotage is from French whispering, and that actually means that it's used on smaller meetings, and that actually means that you are sitting next to the speaker and whisper in his ear or interpret in his or her ear. It's actually, it's a bit challenging for your vocal cords, so you shouldn't do this for a long time. I will share with you some challenges that we are all facing once some of them I already mentioned in the previous panel, but let's say a proper booth. What that means is that you have to have a proper booth of a proper dimensions with air conditioning, well lit, and unfortunately you don't get this most of the times. So we should all, strive to get these standards, but it's not always possible. Another challenge is relay. So this actually means that, for example, if you have a Spanish speaker and you interpret into English, then and let's say you have like 5 different booths, different languages, they interpret. Actually, they interpret you. So they interpret from English into their respective languages. And why is this challenging? First of all, you have to be extra careful when you do this because you have to be really clear and to be really careful with how you are speaking, because this could actually lead to everybody else performing badly, which you don't want. Then also you have a lot of buttons to press when you have a relay. Well, not actually. If you interpret into English, you don't have. I mean, it's normal job for you, but everybody else has a lot of different. Buttons that they have to press, but it's really complicated because at the same time you have to listen to the floor, listen to your colleagues, speak another language, then choose between languages, choose between who you are listening to, what language you are speaking to. It can be really complicated. So you have this technical issue there. Speed of the speech it's I mean, it's something that everybody agrees on and everybody asks about, but what I find challenging is not the speed of a speech, but if a speech is unstructured, that can be really hard. It's hard to follow the thought of a speaker. If you have non-native English speaker, this can also be challenging if they have strong accents, so sometimes you just don't understand what they want to say. So you kind of have, you have to set your ear to this accent. Then I already said something about the tone. You have to follow the tone as well. You have to be careful with political correctness, with some cultural differences. So this is something that you also need to have in mind. Challenge number 6 is interesting. It's humor. So humor is really hard to translate or interpret. And what some of the some experienced interpreters suggest is that if you just can't translate a joke, you can just say, okay, now the speaker is telling a joke and it's really funny, so please laugh, to show him respect. And it actually works. It works because everybody starts laughing because they don't expect to hear this in their phones. Headphones. When you don't get materials, I already mentioned that. It can be really tricky. Either way, you have to do your research. It's essential. But it's easier when you get the materials. It narrows down your research. Public performers, especially for consecutive interpreting, it's like I said, you're very much exposed. The worst thing that can happen to you is that someone corrects you, and it can happen because usually someone else in the room knows the language. So if you have a technique, so you decided to leave out something or maybe to mention it later, but they say, oh, you didn't say this, you didn't translate everything. So it can be really, really embarrassing and really awkward, but you just you have to keep on interpreting. What if you don't know all the words? This is something that I also mentioned before. Just ask or improvise. Listen to the context. One big question is if the interpretation is conscious or unconscious. I would say from my experience that it's mostly on an unconscious level. This is something that it's called being in the zone. There's a book called Interpreting in the Zone, and it's explained. It is explained like it doesn't mean it doesn't have to be only interpretation. It can be into sports or for anything else. For example, you start interpreting, and you don't think about it. It's going flawless. It's going. You don't think about the time, and then you think that you worked only like 5 minutes, but actually it was like 20 minutes, but you don't realize the time. So this is called being in the zone. Finally, the future of interpreting is, as I said, mostly in remote interpreting. And for this, you need to have a good set of headphones. You need to have a stable internet connection. You need to have at least one computer, maybe even 2 monitors. And you have to know some of these platforms that are used for remote interpreting. There are a lot of webinars, some of them free, so you can just search them and get to know this new trend in interpreting. And finally, a word of wisdom. As you can see in the slide, to limit the negative consequences of fatigue on the brain while interpreting, it is important that interpreters take breaks, know their limitations, and be well rested when on assignment. If scheduled for an 8-hour shift, take advantage of your breaks to move around, eat a healthy meal, and relax. Try to avoid unnecessary physical and emotional stresses, and remember to thank your brain for the incredible work that you do. This is it from me. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Sariana. That's really interesting. I like what you say about it being unconscious. I guess eventually it becomes pretty instinctive, like it just comes second nature to you. I think that's very cool. I did write down a few questions. We're about to exceed the time limit. So if you could just give like short, maybe 30 or so second answers. Going back to Caitlin, Rudy Heller asked, how can we fix that unbalanced sharing of information? Now it's mostly English into foreign. We need to change that. Do you have any ideas of how we can make the social science exchange more balanced?
I think by establishing its importance first, and because that's kind of what my research seeks to do, is show that there are specific characteristics in this field that we should study. It's not just like, oh, there's legal, there's medical, but this is also an important field to understand the nuances in. So maybe if we can add more attention to that, then we can have more translators bringing things into English.
Okay. And he also asked, can you expand on the concept of you can't abandon words for concepts?
Okay, so I think because one characteristic that makes it seem technical is that concepts and theories are the important aspect, but like technical texts, which are supposed to be straightforward and concise, that's not exactly the case with the social sciences. A lot of times orators will use like literary devices and certain stylistic techniques in portraying their concepts, and I think that's pretty unique to the social sciences. And even in academic writing, the same thing. So it's important to use that flow of words too, even though you're pushing concepts.
Thank you, Caitlin. I did want to ask Katam a question that appeared here in the chat that also relates to a comment I wanted to make about the idea of translating comedy, which I thought was really interesting because it obviously comes with a set of challenges conveying like the humor. If there's a pun, like it can be really hard to translate comedy. But Cristiano asked in the chat, how dangerous is it for translators to become visible in some countries in the Arab world, especially translating politically charged comedy that challenges ruling governments?
Yeah, thank you for this. Actually, because first of all, because it's comedy, so it is like it's maybe the censorship or at least you have excuse. For example, if you are saying a political statement or whatever, so you can just say I'm kidding, or you know the speaker is kidding, or he's making a joke, or so because it's comedy, there is I think at least an excuse or a logical let's say statement you make if you want to say, if you want to be involved in politics. This is one thing. The other thing is that they use social media. So even when I translate, I will not use I will use social media platforms to to post my translation. Those shows that I'm translating right now, they are already posted on YouTube. So what I will do also, I will post my translation on YouTube. So I think there is less censorship in that regard. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, and I think we are kind of getting to the max we can go with the time. So I'm gonna circle back to a question for Sladyana. Someone asked, sorry, Ellen asked, have the interpreters who worked at the ICTY in The Hague shaped interpreting in your part of the world in some way?
Yes, this is the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Well, I wouldn't say that they have shaped interpreting or interpreters. I actually think that a lot of interpretation jobs are happening right now during this European Union accession process. So we have so many different projects in a different field of economy, of judiciary, environment, you know, all these different topics. We have a lot of projects. So I think that actually interpretation in Serbia is growing right now. Is actually at its highest level right now.
Okay, thank you. All right, and Diego just told me we can address a couple more questions if we want. So there was another one for Caitlin. What do you believe is the responsibility of a legal court translator in terms of register and grammatical stylistic adaptations when translating court forms and other legal text for LEP populations using the courts? And that one's in the Q&A if you want to reread it since it was kind of long.
Are you sure that one was for me? Since I didn't talk too much about courts. Wait, oh, what is the response? Okay. Legal translator in terms of register. Oh, I feel like I can't really speak on that question since I didn't really look into that very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see, what else? Someone also asked for Caitlin, how do you quote articles when there are no official translations into the target language?
Would you be able to clarify what you mean by that question? Like, are you talking about the international texts where there's no source text exactly. I
That
don't
was
know.
from Erica. If she's around, maybe she can clarify.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, I see. How do you quote articles when they're not? Yeah, I feel like I don't understand the question entirely. I'm sorry.
Here, we're going to allow
And
Erica to talk in case
oh,
she
sorry.
wants to clarify.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you all?
Hi.
The question several times in the translation assignments I get, they are quoting professional science pieces. So how would you quote them if those scientific pieces or scientific pieces of writing have not been officially translated into the target language?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I actually had that in my slides later. Okay, so one solution is like, are you saying, because sometimes social scientists will make new jargon to explain theories, right? So there's no word that exists in your language. Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, just for instance, you have text that quotes where they base their theory or their you know, they would use reference texts. So sometimes the texts, you know, are only existing in English. They do not exist in other languages, and you are translating into Spanish or into Portuguese. So how do you relay that? You know, that it's whatever, you can provide a clarification of what the title means, but do you do that, or do you leave them in English? What is your translation strategy when you encounter something like that?
Okay, so for my research, there's a few options. One that I was talking about was calc. So that I would recommend using that more if you know that social scientists invented that concept, because a lot of times in social sciences, if they have a new theory, they make a new word to go with that theory. So you could put that in italics and leave that word in there, and then maybe use a footnote or something like that. Because, or if it's something that maybe people have heard of, like one example that's a little obvious is like bourgeoisie, that's used a lot in social sciences, and it's French, but we all know what that means, so you can leave it. But if it's something that doesn't exist, I would probably recommend putting a footnote, or sometimes it's suggested even making up your own word for that kind of concept. So it depends on the situation. I hope that
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. I think now we are pretty much like right at the end of it. There's a couple more questions in the chat. If you can answer real quick for Caitlin, there's how do you relay the importance of culture to the courts? I feel they think Spanish covers the entire continent. Have any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure. I didn't cover the courts as much, so I'm sorry.
Okay, sure, not too, yeah, okay. First, Ladiana, have you ever been in a situation in which you need to translate a joke? What did you do?
Yes, yeah, of course. Speakers like telling jokes. Well, you know, sometimes you can actually translate or interpret a joke. So sometimes you need to explain, you know, and sometimes if it's just, you know, if it's impossible to translate, then you just say, I usually explain. The speaker is telling a joke about this, and you know, that's it. Yeah,
okay.
As I said, improvise.
Would they laugh
right.
if you explain it?
Sorry?
Would they laugh?
Well,
if
if you can translate it well, then yes, they laugh. Sometimes they even, I mean, you know, it's inspirational thing. If you have a good inspiration and then you can, you know, improvise somehow, then yes, they laugh. Yeah, of course.
Or you can tell them to laugh.
You can also tell them to laugh. Yeah, please laugh now.
That's what
Yeah.
Rudy Heller would do.
But I think I've watched this video when the interpreter, she asked the audience to laugh, but the speaker did know that she did not translate the joke because the joke was like a long, it's like consists of 3 minutes or something. But when he said a joke, please laugh. It's like it takes a few seconds. So he did realize that she did not translate the joke.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't just leave, you can't just be quiet. You have to say something. So,
Yeah.
it depends on the situation. I mean, I had a different situation. I had a situation where a speaker spoke really good English. He was German. But then, at one point he decided to say the key word in German. And I don't speak German. I mean, I don't know a word of German, but based on the context, I knew what it was. So if I didn't know, if I wasn't able to conclude what it was, I would just say, okay, the speaker said something in German. I'm not sure what that meant. You have to explain something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, keep talking.
All right. Well, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and I think it was a great panel. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, and I'm really proud of all of you. So let's move on to